Alright, we need to talk about the very first cinematic trailer of The Witcher 4, which came out recently, and since I'm a little late on the subject, and there is a lot to discuss, I shall not waste too much time on introductions, and instead get straight to the point. Starting from the beginning, which might be my favorite part of the entire trailer. Even without the bathtub opening scene, a strong sense for the world of The Witcher is immediately conveyed by the grim atmosphere, the manner and the accent in which the father speaks to his daughter. We get a few glimpses of this mysterious Witcher preparing for something, and it's all beautiful and well crafted, and I love it. The location where these events take place remains unknown. Interviews with CDPR have revealed that it's somewhere to the far north. However, it does not seem like Skellige to me. Perhaps somewhere in northern Redania would be my guess. My assumption is based mostly on the clothing. These white and red patterns on the ceremonial dress of the young girl are very reminiscent of what we often see in traditional Slavic costumes. You can find them here in Bulgaria, further north as well, in Russia, Poland, Ukraine, and so on. They can be seen on male outfits as well, and on other pieces of embroidery which aren't related to clothing. And since I get the impression that Redania is more often than not associated with Slavic things, I suspect that this quest might be taking place somewhere in that region. But back to the trailer, we have an emotional parting between the father and the daughter. There's a well-animated tear in her eye, but suddenly the enigmatic Witcher is revealed, and it's none other than Ciri.
No!
Okay, there's a lot to talk about here. First off, she looks a little different, doesn't she? In fact, I conducted a small experiment. I used my wife as an unsuspecting test subject. I called her over to take a look at something, and I showed her this picture. I cut out the double swords on the back to make it seem less Witcher-related, although she knows everything about me is Witcher-related, but regardless, I told her to have a look. So she looks for a moment and asks who this is. I say nothing and instead show her this one. She looks at it like she's beginning to see something familiar, and then I tell her to look at the scar, and she finally realizes who it is. But she claims that Ciri looks rather different here, a bit like a Viking, according to her. And I suppose there is some truth to it. She was more recognizable in the Gwent trailer, for example, but there's nothing particularly wrong with that. It's a different game, a different engine. Yennefer originally looked rather different too in the early Witcher 3 trailers, and this rendition of Ciri is certainly not unpleasant to look at, so I think I'll get used to it if I have to. What I might not get used to, however, is her new voice.
Back to the village. Go, now.
I absolutely prefer the sound of Ciri's original voice from The Witcher 3 to the one we hear in the trailer.
You chose her.
First of all, bollocks. Second, if you're going to speak of courage, at least address me directly, and not through Geralt.
I don't know why the change was made. It is likely for technical reasons. I'm told that the Polish voice actress for Ciri remained unchanged, so it doesn't seem to be a creative decision. Some people have speculated that it's because Ciri has gotten older, but I'm not convinced. First, as I mentioned, the Polish voice has not changed, and also, developer interviews indicate that these events take place several years after the end of the third game, and that we will get to experience the early stages of Ciri's life as a Witcher. So she cannot be much older than the last time we saw her, likely around 30 years old at the time of The Witcher 4, would be my guess. But even if she is older, the English actress who voiced Ciri in the third game was already in her 40s at the time. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, in real life she is the same age as the actor who voices Geralt, and she is notably older than Yennefer. So I would love to hear her original English voice make a return for the actual game, if possible.
I've had enough of this. I won't be taken somewhere like a bundle. I will not sit and twiddle my thumbs. I am sick of waiting, sick of hiding.
And in terms of her physical appearance, I will admit, there truly is something about Ciri that feels a little off to me in the trailer. I cannot quite put my finger on it. It's likely a combination of her different voice, her slightly altered appearance and general behavior, but when I think of Ciri, based on the books and the games, in addition to her feisty character, I also associate with her a degree of subtlety, of finesse, if you will, and of cunning. And her portrayal in the trailer lacks some of that. She comes across as a little brutish, and that may be an overstatement, rough around the edges, perhaps, and it may in fact be an intended side effect of the Witcher mutations. Perhaps in addition to losing her signature green eyes, she lost a piece of herself too. In any case, I would love to see some of those old qualities of hers in the actual game. Okay, with the physical characteristics out of the way, let us delve into more important things.
Yes, there are always more important things.
Like the fact that she's an actual Witcher now. I have made 2 or 3 videos long time ago talking about my expectations for the 4th game, and there were 2 things that I really did not wish to see. The first and more important one was Geralt making a return as the protagonist of The Witcher 4. I know many people disagreed back then, and perhaps they still do. Some of them went as far as to suggest that they will not play a Witcher game if it's not about Geralt. And while I do love Geralt, I am more than willing to finally let him rest. Every great story and character deserves a proper ending, and I think CDPR did a splendid job in giving Geralt just that in The Witcher 3, specifically in the Blood and Wine expansion and even the 10th anniversary video. So I see no reason for the developers to drag him back and potentially ruin what they managed to accomplish rather beautifully. And luckily, Geralt is not the main character, so I'm happy about that. Now the second, admittedly less important thing that I did not wish the developers to do was making one of the endings canon. And unfortunately that has happened. Whether Ciri decided to leave and never return, or chose to become Empress, it hardly matters anymore, because one way or another, she is now a fully fledged Witcher in the 4th game. She carries the silver sword she got from Geralt during the ending where she becomes a Witcher, and more importantly, she has gone through the trial of the grasses. They might twist the other endings a little to make some sense of them, you know, things like she became an empress for a while, but ultimately changed her mind, or perhaps Ciri left, never to return, but at some point decided to return and become a Witcher anyway. Now, the interviews I mentioned suggest that CDPR have been planning to use Ciri as the new protagonist for quite some time. That it was a well thought out decision and not something they chose to do lightly or hastily, which is great. If they have major plans for her, I would love to see their vision fulfilled. On the other hand, however, it seems to me that the decision was made well after the 3rd game was fully developed. Especially in light of my latest video, do check it out if you haven't, though I must warn you it's 3 hours long, but in it I talk extensively about the very original story that CDPR wrote for The Witcher 3 more than 12 years ago, and even that story had the 3 distinct endings for Ciri. They were a little different. In fact, the ending where she becomes a Witcher was rather significantly different. The initial idea was for Ciri to ultimately turn away from the path, but she could also die or become Empress. And despite the countless changes that the story of the game went through over the many years of development, the same 3 general endings were still used in the final version of The Witcher 3. So there is a sense that the writers at CDPR felt rather strongly about these endings, and it is unfortunate that 2 of them have been disregarded.
'Tis a foul age.
That it is.
Now, I will admit that the ending where Ciri becomes a Witcher is indeed the most comfortable choice if you plan on making a new Witcher game where Ciri is the new Witcher. However, again, if they had these plans all along, why not adjust the endings accordingly? In any case, I shan't dwell on this any further. ultimately the Witcher games are rather notorious at this point for having less than perfect continuity between installments. So if the writers and the artists and everyone at CDPR have a good story in mind, a vision they believe in, involving Ciri being a witcher, then I'm happy to give it a try, and who knows, it might end up being wonderful just as The Witcher 3 is, despite not fully conforming to some parts of the previous games. The developers have actually spoken some more about Ciri versus Geralt as the main character, and I will come back to it a little later in the video. For now, let's talk about Ciri being an actual witcher, a mutant, one that has gone through the trials and all that. My first question is, why the sandwich fuck did she need to do this? Why gamble with something that kills 7 out of 10 boys? Especially given that she already has these awesome powers. And don't tell me that the Elder Blood makes her immune. I don't like the Elder Blood as an excuse. What's more, there's a good indication that she may no longer have the power of the Elder Blood at all. She never uses any short-range teleportation during the fight, and there are no hints of Ciri having traveled through space or time. So it appears to me that she will no longer have the power that makes her so unique in the 4th game. How or why she lost it is a mystery. My very first guess was that it's the result of going through the Trial of the Grasses. Because, you know, the mutagens affect you on a genetic level, and that's precisely the level at which the Elder Blood operates. So it can make sense, however, it doesn't really help answer the question of why she decided to do it in the first place, so perhaps CDPR will explain it away by saying that her power was depleted, essentially, when she used it to stop the White Frost. This, in turn, could serve as part of the explanation for why Ciri chose to undergo the mutations, to basically reclaim a piece of the power that she had lost. Now, is this reason enough for her to gamble with her life? Probably not. Not to mention that one does not simply become a witcher. Mutagens are needed, people who know how to use them and administer them, magic is involved. And so the next question is, who, in Melitele's name, would agree to help Ciri to do this to herself? None of her friends seemed particularly interested in creating more witchers, least of all turning Ciri, of all people, into a witcher. Eskel and Lambert risked their lives to save Ciri. Lambert potentially dies while doing so. Geralt has obviously gone through hell and back for her. Vesemir actually died protecting her. Our dear darling Triss got herself tortured to help us get information about Ciri. And Yennefer made all of Skellige hate her for similar reasons. So to think that after everything I've listed, these people would simply decide to submit Ciri to the Witcher mutations and potentially kill her makes no sense. But Ciri is a stubborn lass. Perhaps she asked her friends. They said no. She got up, told them to be gone and plow themselves, and left. She found herself some stray witchers, possibly from the School of the Cat, and a mage or two. Together they formed the School of the Lynx, and Ciri finally mutated herself against all reason. Is that what happened? I honestly don't know. Another scenario that occurred to me, which might support my hypothesis that the mutations stripped Ciri of her power, is that she may have been forced into this. Perhaps she was kidnapped by a mage, who is perhaps in league with a rogue group of witchers. Of course, that doesn't explain why she wears their medallion, assuming that they are the School of the Lynx. Perhaps she took over somehow? Who knows? The developers are keeping us in the dark on these matters, as far as I know, and that's fine. But we do need a good explanation for all of this, because much of it is highly questionable. However, another thing I will admit is that purely from a gameplay perspective, it would be hard to pull off a Witcher game where the main character has the power of Ciri from the ending of The Witcher 3. Balancing between sword fighting, usage of signs, time and space travel, and zipping all across the battlefield might be a bit too much. Also, CDPR are referring to the game as the start of a new saga, so despite being called The Witcher 3, sorry, I say Witcher and 3 comes so naturally afterwards, so despite being called The Witcher 4, it will likely serve as a soft reboot, and in such a case it's always easier if the main character starts at a relatively low level of power. So I understand why they might wish to make Ciri a little weaker. Again, if this was the intent all along, they probably shouldn't have made her so strong at the end of the third game, but enough of that. Since I mentioned magic, the developers have made a comment on this moment, and as far as I understand from their wording, what Ciri does here is in fact magic. As in, the sorceress type of magic.
My favorite type of magic.
It's not a Witcher sign. Some of you might question Ciri's use of such abilities, because she sort of relinquished her magical powers as well in the books, during that business in the Korath Desert with the unicorn. I was honestly under the impression that this is why Ciri never uses any conventional magic in The Witcher 3, but I don't know what to think at this point. We'll just have to wait and see and hope for a satisfying explanation in the future. Moving on, here's another thing I noticed which perhaps should have been done differently. I feel like this trailer leans a little too heavily on showing us familiar imagery. Of course, there's nothing wrong with reminding us of the things we know and love, but to me, unlike previous Witcher trailers, this one does a bit too much of that. Let me give you several examples. We have an opening with a bathtub scene. Early on, we have a moment where the Witcher shows up and people are frightened. The Witcher then goes into a gloomy place to fight the monster, and we get a close-up of his creepy Witcher eyes after drinking a potion. Or her eyes, in this case. We have a scene where the Witcher is spinning a chain in front of a monster, anticipating its charge in order to sidestep and ensnare it. The Witcher is also bringing a monster's head to a group of humans, only to realize soon afterwards that they themselves are the true monsters, because of the horrible way they treat one another. So horrible, in fact, that the Witcher cannot stand idly by and decides to intervene, potentially killing some of them, and also letting them know, verbally, that they are indeed the true monsters.
What are you doing?
Killing monsters.
There are no gods here. There are only monsters.
Killing monsters. Good one.
Just came out that way.
It's just something that made an impression on me even the first time I watched it. Oh, and one more thing, if I may, was this brief moment where I think they forgot to animate the young woman's face. I think I already said that I loved how she cried during the separation with her father, but moments later, when Ciri tries to stop her from sacrificing herself, she snaps back and exclaims how she must do this, she must save her people, and at this moment the camera cuts to the girl's face, and she has this wide-eyed, blank expression that does not fit the tone of her voice or the scene at all. Don't get me wrong, the trailer looks great otherwise, and there is good facial animation in general, for Ciri especially, but I think something went wrong here.
Nay! I must save them! Save the village!
Okay, enough of that. Let's move on to more important topics and take a look at the actual story that unfolds in the trailer, because I do have a small piece of criticism for that as well. Again, generally speaking, I love it. It is very fitting for the themes and the tone of the quests in the Witcher games. We have some heavy, dramatic, and possibly unforeseen consequences from our choices in the end. You know, with the girl dying, and it's great. In fact, the trailer seems to depict actual events from the game, perhaps a certain Witcher contract, and it reminds me a lot of the quest in Skellige where you can side with the Leshen. I've made a video about it, it's called In the Heart of the Woods, and in short, it's about this secluded village which has made a kind of unspoken pact with an ancient Leshen who lives nearby. You can either kill it or make an offering to it, and depending on your choices, people can live or die, you might be forced to kill some of them, and so on. It's a great quest, and it also has something that to me is essential, but we don't really get to see in the trailer. Let me try to explain. So, during the quest with the Leshen, we hear stories. They tell us how this village was the birthplace of some of the best hunters and most fierce warriors, how it has stood the test of time, despite the most dire of conditions, and raids, and all sorts of trouble. And there is a strong indication that despite the Leshen killing people from time to time, this questionable relationship with it may be the reason why the village hasn't fallen yet, and some of the locals believe that. Others, however, think it's nonsense, and we, Geralt and the players, really aren't sure. There is a degree of doubt and tension. Actually, as far as I know, the initial plan for that quest was that if you chose to kill the Leshen, the village would indeed end up destroyed by monsters sometime later in the game. Now, fast forward to the trailer of The Witcher 4. Like the quest with the Leshen, we have the heavy dramatic stuff at the end. But what we miss is something that makes Ciri's choice genuinely difficult before we even know the consequences. As far as we can see in the trailer, we have an isolated village somewhere up north, full of people who believe in some suspicious ritual and are willing to sacrifice a girl to a monster. There is hardly any reason for Ciri not to intervene and try to save her. You know, no real tension to challenge us and make us doubt. Consider that perhaps letting the girl die might be a better choice somehow. Now, it may be that the actual quest in the game has more to it than it seems in the trailer. As I mentioned, we hear the girl claiming that she's doing this to save the village. The people call it tradition, the will of the gods, so it's highly likely that there is in fact deeper meaning behind these rituals than merely satiating the appetite of a monster once in a while. But to my surprise, we never got the chance to learn anything more in the trailer. And speaking of things that surprised me, I'd like to discuss one statement by CDPR during the interviews I mentioned earlier. They have said on a couple of occasions that Ciri, unlike Geralt as the main character, presents many unique opportunities and a lot of freedom to both the writers and the players to mold and develop her character throughout the game, and generally to do things with her that would not have been possible with Geralt due to the fact that he is so well established already. And while I did not wish Geralt to be the main character, I am not convinced that Ciri is so much better than him in that regard. It is true that she is a lot younger, and generally speaking, younger characters can be a lot more chaotic, perhaps more susceptible to changing their minds and making all kinds of choices, and basically have a more flexible personality and values. However, I'm not convinced that this applies to Ciri specifically, certainly not to such a large extent. She may be 30 years old, or however old she is, but she has had a ton of characterization in the Witcher books. Lots of screen time, or page time, I suppose, lots of dialogue and interactions with all kinds of characters. She's gone through many adventures, dealt with so many issues, and this has been a constant theme for her character since she was 10 years old. She's been a princess, a refugee, a witcher in training, a freaking criminal. Additionally, she's been hurt a lot, both physically and emotionally. That has left many scars on her, both visible and invisible. And all this before we even bring up the countless times she has traveled through space and time, and the stuff she's done with the NL, and living on different worlds, and saving our world, and yeah, Ciri may be young, but her character, her personality, her mind, all that has been pretty well formed, I would say. And while I'm excited to see what CDPR does with her, it's difficult for me to agree that an unprecedented level of freedom will come along with the transition from Geralt to Ciri. Okay, what else haven't I covered? I haven't talked about the monster. It is apparently from Serbian folklore, and despite the Serbians being our neighbors, I will admit that I hadn't heard of it until I watched the trailer. Perhaps my Serbian viewers can write some more about it in the comments. This is what they call it. I'm not sure whether in Serbian the stress is at the start of the word or the end, so the correct pronunciation should be either bauk or bauk. Bauk probably sounds weird to English-speaking people, but from a Bulgarian perspective, especially if it's related to the sound that the monster makes, it might make sense. But again, I'm sure the Serbians will let us know. Someone on Discord said that the trailer depiction of the monster reminds him of the Kashay in Gwent. That one is usually Russian in origin. I'm not sure if there was any inspiration here, but the environment certainly looks similar. Another thing I should probably address is that there has been some discussion about whether a woman should be the main character of The Witcher 4. On that subject, I absolutely loved Queen Maeve. She is of course the main character of Thronebreaker, The Witcher Tales. She's the one who made Geralt a knight during the famous Battle of the Bridge, but in the game she was very well written, exceptionally well voiced, she had firmer and softer sides, she was a leader and a mother, and had to make hard choices, and she looked good too. I would love to see Queen Maeve make an appearance in The Witcher 4, or maybe get another game for herself, why not? But you might say Thronebreaker was a different game. What about The Witcher specifically? Okay, here's the thing. Geralt is strong but smart. He doesn't talk much, but turns into a proper philosopher when he needs to.
The right of Witchers to live and function in this world has fallen out of balance, because the struggle between good and evil now plays out on a different battlefield with different rules.
He's really tough, but also sensitive deep down. He is the quintessential professional, a true master of his craft. He is deeply in love and his heart is devoted, but he also sleeps with all the beautiful women he meets.
My oh my.
Missed you.
And of course, he's a remarkable father. And so, in a way, you could say that he's a bit of a male power fantasy, which I do not mind at all. As I said, I love Geralt, but with this in mind, especially in a video game format, I can see how it might be difficult to recapture the spirit of The Witcher with a female character. You know, it's like... what is it like? What is a very womanly character? Jane Eyre, perhaps? While not necessarily similar to Geralt, her story, the impression it leaves, and the ideas it conveys cannot really work if she was a young man instead. Careful adjustments would need to be made, and perhaps this is exactly what the developers at CDPR plan on doing with The Witcher 4. Again, I love the female lead in Thronebreaker, and if Ciri ends up being just as good, albeit in a different way, then I'm looking forward to it. Finally, I'd like to talk a bit about the idea of a brand new character versus an already established one. It is now certain that we are getting Ciri, so this will be more hypothetical, but I wanted to respond to a certain school of thought, or at least a recent trend in the comments, which claims that Ciri, as a protagonist, is far better than someone new, someone unknown, possibly nameless, and so on. I disagree with that. What matters is that each scenario is developed properly. For example, my favorite story-driven game of all time is The Witcher 3, in case you didn't know, and it is a clear case of the pre-established character. Not only are there 2 previous games with Geralt,
the video game developed here in Poland that's won fans the world over, The Witcher,
but a whole bunch of books about him too. And yet, before I played The Witcher 3, my top favorite one was Dragon Age Origins. Which, as the name suggests, is a kind of origin story. You start with a fairly young, barely established character, one who gets up to all sorts of things, and I love it. Additionally, having a new, nameless character doesn't necessarily mean You can't have a rich lore centered around you. A great example is Planescape Torment. It's a bit of an old and dated game, perhaps more than a bit, but it's a hidden gem if you have the time and patience for it. And you can also have something like the Mass Effect series, which I would classify as a hybrid. While you have a name in the first game, that name doesn't really mean much. However, by the time you get to the third game, with which, by the way, I have plenty of issues, but one thing it does really well is that by the time you get to it, you have become a living legend, and all the character development and events that make up who you've become take place over the course of the first 2 games. So, lots of types of main characters can work if done properly, and I firmly disagree that Ciri is necessarily better than, say, the nameless Viking-looking girl from the School of the Lynx, who kind of looks like Ciri. And I believe the only thing I haven't covered is the music. There is a potentially massive change. We have a different composer. Though not all that different, he was heavily involved in Cyberpunk, as well as Gwent and Thronebreaker, and all of these have great soundtracks. I often use Thronebreaker music in my videos. Knowing myself, I'm probably playing one right now in the background. So I am a little worried. I mean, I've grown so used to the music of The Witcher that I can barely listen to my own voice without Witcher music playing behind it, but the music in the trailer is very fitting, and I look forward to seeing and hearing what they come up with for The Witcher 4. Also, if you are only listening to this video, do have a look at the screen to see the names of the composers, because I won't attempt to pronounce them. And with that said, I believe we're done for now. Do let me know what you think of everything I talked about. You can give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and if not, I thank you very much for watching anyway. Special thanks to my supporters and YouTube members, and until the next video, stay tuned and be good.